Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Crew.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summit.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, folks, this is Tommy DeLago, ex-crew chief of an NHRA funny car, soon to be crew chief again. I'm on the Break It Down show with these two buffoons.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, buffoons is true. And today, sitting in with me is our guest co-host and a racing brother, Dave Montoya. Dave is going to help me tighten up my drag game. And,
well, he's definitely got the right last name for racing, don't he?
Yeah.
Well, I have yet to run into any track equipment.
Well, give it time.
So, I don't know if you know this, Tommy, but the thing we discovered and unlocked by our racing team, my daughter entered on the Sears Point Raceway during practice, and it was going the wrong direction. She's not the first one to do it. And
well, there are no do not enter signs, so it makes it a little bit hard.
Right, and it might have been a bigger deal, except for the race organizer's cousin or niece or whatever did the exact same thing. So it was funny. And then, I don't know if you know, but there's actually a unlocked racetrack at Sears Point on the video game, and it looks like a bunch of donuts at the helipad, and that was unlocked by the man you're talking to now, Dave Montoya.
It is an Easter egg track.
Now, what racing game are you guys talking about?
Life.
Oh, the real one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know you could unlock tracks in real life.
We didn't either, but we, or I should say I, managed.
I thought they called that going off road.
Well, there was some of that done too.
And you know what? It all started with a John Force burnout.
Oh boy.
So, okay, let's clue the audience in. I mean, we're going to be chumming it up and powing up. Tommy's from my hometown, Benica, and of course, Dave races cars with me, so we're all going to be really tight and everything. But what the fuck is an NHRA crew chief for a funny car?
What do you mean? What is it?
Tell us what it is that you do for when you have a gig. And right now you're between gigs, but what is it that you do?
Basically, a carny who's in charge of all the carnies.
What is the midget's job?
The midget. We don't have any midgets.
Or the bearded lady, then.
We don't have any of those either. It's a different kind of. It's carnival. I didn't say circus.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Basically, as an NHRA drag racing crew chief, it's a lot like being a NASCAR crew chief, except for in NASCAR they've got engineers and all this other stuff. They've gotten so technical, and as a crew chief, you pretty much take those places of all that. You get 7 to 8 guys that you're in charge of to make sure you've taught them right, how to do the job right, service the car between each run right, keep everybody somewhat happy and getting along, and making tuning decisions on the race car every run. So that could, there's over 30 things that you have to make sure that are right, depending on track conditions, weather conditions. I mean, when you have a car that's making close to 11,000 horsepower, 3 to 4 degrees of ambient temperature changes. It can be the difference between it running really good or blowing up. So, I mean, they're really nitromethane is really sensitive to the weather.
So it's more about the weather than it is about grip?
No, it's all of it together. That's the hardest part for even some of us crew chiefs to understand, is that we don't have any gears. We don't have a first gear or second gear. It's just a high gear. It's in gear all the whole time. So what we do is we use 6 clutch discs in each pack, and they only last one run. So there's 6 friction discs, 5 actual steel floaters. So a steel floater between each disc, and there's 18 clutch arms on a centrifugal clutch. But we hold 12 of those arms from being effective until each certain parts of the track. And we can control that with an actual hydraulic throw-up bearing, and we start sending that thing away from those arms at certain points in the track to apply more clutch, to tug on the motor harder, to pull more G's to accelerate the car. And that's, if you have too much clutch, not enough power, then it'll smoke the tires. If you have too much power, not enough clutch, you can smoke the tires. So they're basically like a married couple, but they're an old married couple and they're in an argument all the time. You got to try to make them get along.
Let me ask you, it kind of in regards to the clutch engagement, you hear a lot about tire shake. And I hear a lot, just real quick, a little background of me. I started working on a crew for a pro mod. And you always hear tire shake this, tire shake that. We need more power. Can you explain the tire shake theory or principle behind what causes it and why more power helps it? Like when they say we need to get up on the tire sooner.
Okay, that's what we would call weak tire shake, because there are two different types of tire shake. There's an aggressive tire shake, and then there's a weak tire shake. Weak tire shake is what likes to break things, and it's very aggressive. It'll give you a headache. What happens is when you hit the throttle on the starting line, that tire wrinkles.
Mm-hmm.
The car actually squats in the back. If it doesn't have enough power or clutch or both to get up on the tire, depending on the track conditions, if there's a lot of grip out there, it will actually start folding up on itself where the wrinkles are in the sidewall. It'll put those same wrinkles in the footprint of the tire.
Okay.
When it does that, it cannot get up on the tire, and it starts folding up on itself. The tire shape is wrong, and it starts shaking really bad. So what a lot of cars will do nowadays is we actually can control the ignition timing and amount of times going down the track. So what we try to do is we try to get the car actually in trouble for the first 0.7 of a second, so it has too much wheel speed.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we'll do on a fuel car is we'll take up to 30 degrees of ignition timing out of the car, and that will take that much power away from it, and that'll settle the tire back down and put it back under control. And then once it does that, we start applying ignition lead back to it again to bring the power back.
So now that kind of leads to today's drag racing with all the technology and the computers. The computers are actually controlling the release of the clutch and the timing and all that at the same time. In a sense, kind of a traction control?
No, not traction control, because they're not making any decisions on their own.
Okay.
They're all predetermined decisions that we do before a run. We're not allowed to make any decisions during a run.
Okay.
It's basically, yes, you can call it a computer, but it's basically like electronic timers.
Got
so
it.
like 10 years ago, what was 10 years ago? 2008. Yeah, so 10 to 15 years ago, we used to do the same thing, but we used what they call pneumatic logic.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that Johnson Controls or somebody would use in the industry, and they're adjustable air timers, and you would have to adjust them, and we would adjust how fast the air would go through them, and when it would finally fill up the chamber, it would set off a certain timer, and boom, that clutch flow would go off, or that timing event would happen, or whatever the bearing event that we wanted to happen. And we used to have up to 30 different air timers, but they're so inconsistent to weather change. Like if you set them and it's only 60 degrees out, they're not going to be anywhere close when it gets to be 90 degrees out. So over time, NHRA had allowed us to do it electronically about probably 10 to 12 years ago. And so now we can figure out what we're going to do. We can look at some of our runs, or we might be experimenting with something like, hey, we've never tried this clutch timer in this early. Let's try it. Let's move it in 300ths, or let's move it in 400ths, or hey, the track's 125 degrees. Let's move all the clutch out 500ths or a tenth, and we can move it in every 100th increment. I mean, so, it's really critical.
I wanted to jump in and ask a couple of questions about early in your career, because I know from talking to Dave and some other guys, you guys all seem to start out in street racing. At some point, you make the decision to say, I don't know, fuck it, I'm just going to go work on this crew and not make any money and eat bologna sandwiches and keep going. And at some point, Dave, like you make a different decision. From both of you, what does that path look like? Because, there's some young kid out there who's street racing trying to figure out where they are. And to them, you're like a god, Tommy. They're like, this guy does exactly what I want to do. How does someone get to where you're at?
The path has changed over the years. When I did it, it was kind of out of necessity. I got to a certain point where I was going drag racing all the way up, with my Nova in Super Street and Super Gas and a lot of bracket races. It's, Sears Point, which I don't think they call that anymore. That's how showing my age now. All the way up to Seattle, Washington, and I'd go to Arizona. Went to Texas one year, and I started to get to the point where I had a decent job, but I was using up all my weekends, all my holiday time, and every dollar that I had. And I found that there's times I didn't even have enough money to get home from a race. Now, the flip side of that was I always seemed to do better when I had no money because, man, I had no way to get home. So it made you focus.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I got to a certain point in time and I'm like, man, I really love racing. I don't have a marketing background and I don't have anybody in my family that has any money. So I thought maybe I could just get my foot in the door in a professional team. Well, back when I did it in 94, it was really hard to get in. I had a job interview about 6 months prior to that to possibly go work up in Carson City for Urson Cams. Their cam guru wanted me to come up there and actually work on some of their cup car cam designs. And after the interview, the money that they offered me wasn't anywhere as close to what I was already making. So I took that off the table, but I called my buddy up there again 6 months later and said, hey, do you know any low dollar nitro teams that are looking for help? And about 3 hours later, he called me and gave me a number to Tommy Johnson Sr. and Jr. out in Iowa when they had the Mopar Dragster. I talked to Sr. for about 3 hours, and he goes, well, how soon can you be here? Well, I loaded all my stuff up and left the next day and drove 29 hours without stopping, and that's history, basically. Nowadays, we hire a lot of kids out of tech schools. And like when I worked at Coletta's, we had a guy that ran a tech school down here in Toledo, Ohio, and he would take the top 2% and guys who he thought would really like to be on the road and do all that, and they would come interview with us. And we had a lot of success hiring guys out of the school. You know, they didn't really have race experience, but all we really need is somebody who has a good attitude and decent mechanical skills. We'll teach you the rest because it's such a niche market that I'm in. Really not many people know how to work on them. Even when I was at even when I was at Bob Gilbertson's in Charlotte, North Carolina, I used to hire guys out of the NASCAR tech school, guys that wouldn't get into the NASCAR school. I'd take their top 1% that was left over, and I hired a couple guys out of that tech school. Now they still actually work with Schumacher Racing after I left there. That's really the best way to do it now is either you know somebody, start out on a nostalgia car, or just go to a tech school and show interest.
What about you, Dave? How did your path go? Because you ended up not on a professional team, but never shook the bug.
So, growing up as a son of a hot rodder, my dad was into, 57 Chevys, Model T, T-bucket roadsters and El Caminos and stuff. And he actually passed away when I was young, but I never take what he taught me, wrenching on cars and everything. And I had buddies that were into restoration of hot rods and, 69 Camaros, 68 Chevelles and such. So I started getting into the hot rod scene. And I actually met one of our current race teammates, Scott Zimmerman, who was into drag racing pretty heavy. And I was restoring a 70 Camaro at the time and wanted it to sound cool. And in California, they just passed the smog exempt law, where 70 or whatever, 72 and older didn't need to pass smog. So I was like, hey, I'd like to put a cam in it, this and that, and make it sound good. So I got into drag racing by meeting Scott. I hung out with him, and I started going faster and faster. Next thing you know, my show car or my restoration project started turning into, a street race car, and started hanging out with other guys street racing. And I started going to Sears Point, what I still call it. But I'd go to more and more drag races, and I'd start going to the Autolite Nationals and seeing all the wrenches being turned and hanging out in the paddock. And I'm like, I want to do that one day. And I always said, like, that would be my dream job. I always had to have a job, and I never could find that stepping stone to break into the field. I would ask the guys at the track, but as you said, it was more of the younger kind of tech guys coming out of the schools or someone that knew somebody, and I could never break into it. The closest I've gotten was wrenching on this pro mod team, and still now it's kind of who you know, what kind of fraternity you're in order to be stepping it up, throughout the series. And I still now have a 9-to-5, and I would love to feed the bug more, but I can't because I got to pay the bills now and keep the wife happy.
Yep.
So I missed that bus, and if I could do it all over again, I almost wish I could bug somebody a little bit more because I love being around.
Well, another thing that helps, if there's anybody out there listening, if you want to get a head start on trying to get a job on a pro team in drag racing is go get your CDL license.
Oh, yeah.
CDL drivers get hired before anybody because there's always a need for, the same guys work on the race cars, but there's always a few that have to drive the trucks, and they'll get hired first because it's, again, you're paid for your knowledge. Well, you don't have much knowledge at this point of a fuel car, but if you have a CDL license, that's like a half a foot in the door right there.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that we've learned with our race, because we've taken our car from the Bay Area all the way out to Road America, which for the audience is in Wisconsin, and then we've also gone to Daytona and raced at Sebring, and it's a chore driving a rig, especially the way we do it. Dave and I went over the Sonora Pass one time with the race car
On our way to Florida.
Yeah. And being able to understand how to safely navigate that and make sure the car gets there in one piece, because it's not about, and Tommy, you know this, like the last thing you want to get is a phone call about the rig, flipped over or some kind of problem. I mean, how many?
I've lived it.
I know that's where we're going right now.
When I worked for Don Perdome, I want to say it was my second time at Perdome's. First year there, two of the guys, I don't know whether it was like 2 a.m. I have a feeling one of them fell asleep, but not sure. They actually hit a car that was abandoned on the side of the road, and it put the semi and everything on its side. Luckily, it wasn't the one with the race car in it, but it still had all of our machines and all of our tools, and it was a major mess. It was a major deal to get over.
Yeah. Does that shut you down from racing for the weekend? Or because I know the race community is tight, but you are competitive. What happens when the car is okay, but the machines are not?
Well, luckily we had enough to get through that weekend, and some of the stuff we were able to get out of the trailer, and it wasn't wrecked because everything was bolted down good enough. And we were able to put some of that stuff in a rental trailer, in a rental truck, and just get enough stuff to the races that we were able to race. But yeah, it was a major undertaking. It was in a way, it was like embarrassing. It was an odd feeling, a helpless feeling of being ultimately responsible, but not being there. Obviously I was home. They woke me up in bed, the mad dash to try to figure out, okay, what do we do? Who do I call? To try to get a rental rig and everything going to try to make sure that we don't miss a race. And it was a pretty, I guess you could say it was a good experience, being in the fire and seeing if you could figure stuff out. Just another challenge, another speed bump in life and in racing. But I definitely wouldn't want it to happen again. It was a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I know, like, everybody, especially someone like, Big Daddy Don Garlitz, he's experienced all that. So what he's looking for from you is you give him the call to say, hey, we got a problem. I'm on it and I'm fixing it. And that really is the mark of, this is my military side speaking. Like, okay, great.
It was Don Perdome, not the Garlitz.
Sorry, Don Perdome. See, that's my
it was the snake.
The snake. So Don Perdome is he's been through that, right? He's looking for you to take over and handle it. And I'm sure that even though you have to go through that trial, standing up and getting through and making the car go, that's a big hurdle. I know that, Dave, you're the same way with our race team. If Dave says the car is going to make it on the track, no matter how many pieces it is at the end of the night, we know we're going to get it on the track. There's something you have to have in that. How much of your job when you're running a team is stuff that doesn't involve figuring out the weather and how happy the fuel is going to be in clutches? Like, how much ego and personalities and driver management is there? That stuff that's just has very little to do with the car going down the track.
It varies. I mean, certain teams I've been on, it's been like easy peasy. And certain teams I've been on, it's been like soap opera. So it just depends, on the chemistry of the team, who's the driver. Certain drivers can be prima donnas, and certain drivers, aren't. And luckily, I've been lucky to where most of the people that have driven cars that I've worked on have been pretty easy. But you still have crew guys and this and that if the chemistry's not right, you can't make it right. There was a time I worked on a team before, and we tried to get the guys to get along all year, and we kept having meetings, and we kept trying to figure it out. And towards the end of the year, because I always have a meeting with the guys, like in Dallas, which is, basically 4 to 5 races before the end of the season. Try to get a heads up on who wants to stay and get a heads up on who we don't want there anymore, so they have time to find a job. And because most of the good jobs are full before the next season even starts. Usually most of them are full by the end of the year in Pomona when we end the last race of the season. So out of just respect, I like to try to give everybody guys a heads up of what's going on, and I like to get a heads up from them so we have time to replace whatever we have to replace too, and have time over the winter to get people trained. But there was a time when we talked to each guy and I talked to each guy in Dallas, and nobody liked anybody. Not one guy went in there and said, yeah, I'm good. They all complained about everybody. So I fired everybody. And started over because I didn't see any way to do it. And actually it worked out really well. The next year we had a group of guys that were all came on the team at the same time. There wasn't, guys that had been there 5 years and didn't like this guy because he just started and, he's a rookie or whatever. And we got the guys together, and we really had, for a low dollar team like Gilbertson's that we were at, we really did fairly well. And the group of guys, they got along. And there's really no way they could have ever done it without getting along. We did 36 races that year. We raced all the NHRA and all the IHRA, which was massive undertaking. I would never want to do that again, but it's cool to say that I've done it. It's very rare. Nobody really does that, and they don't even have that many races anymore. But it's all about, what I'm getting at is it's all about chemistry. I try to, when I hire crew people, I try to get guys that will get along. I believe if they're mechanical, you can just about teach them anything mechanical in the car and be successful. But one thing you can't teach is personality and chemistry. So if you hire from chemistry, you have a way better chance of being successful than if you just hire all the most talented guys. Kind of like you see with football teams. You see teams that are supposed to be the dream team, and they get all this talent, and they get everybody in free agency. Like the Eagles did that 1 year, 10 years ago or whatever it was, 15 years ago. And they all didn't get along, so they couldn't work together. Yeah. And that's what it's really about. It's about being one, being many, but acting like one and towards one common goal. If you can do that, you can actually achieve more than the talent you have. If you have a bunch of talent, but nobody wants to work as a team, you ain't going nowhere. It's no different than baseball, football, soccer. It's very much a team sport.
It's good to know that happens at the highest levels as well as the bottom levels like we deal with, because we have the same thing where personalities clash and you fight back and forth and stuff doesn't get done. The sports analogy is always a great one, right? Because a lot of, here in the Bay Area, we use the 49ers of Bill Walsh era as kind of a model of how to get along and win championships. Today's teams, you have the Golden State Warriors, all the superstars, right? Can you think of a team or a year or season you had where you were that whole one team, everyone for one, all for one, try to work to the...
Oh, most definitely. I've had several of them. We didn't win as many races and do as good as we should have. But the group of guys that I had in 2000, I want to say 2003 and 4 over at Don Prudhomme's, I mean, we had a dream team over there. These guys could make anything happen. We could be in bad situation because maybe the car was on fire and we're between rounds, and we all worked together during the week to make sure everything was prepared. We didn't slack off, and they were always prepared for any situation. And that was one of my first teams. I was like, wow, these guys this is a team. This is how you build it. This is how they got to get along. And it doesn't mean you have to get along every day. Just got to have a good working relationship and just be able to put even little bitches aside and still try to get that one common goal, which is, winning a race and winning championships. And then the next time I was, really saw that type of group was the group that I had a hand in building in 2000. I took over Matt Hagan's car in 2009. By middle of 2010, we had the right people in place, and we were setting national records and almost won the championship. And then in 2011, we all stuck together, and we ended up winning the championship and set a whole bunch more national records. So 2010, 2011, they were pretty awesome. And then the group of guys that I've finally assembled up at Coletta's, now that I'm not there with, but that group up there is close to being, as close to being like those two other groups as I've had since. I used to think it was a once in a lifetime deal, but now I really do believe it is rare, but you can build it if you have the right vision and you try to build it from personalities and chemistry. As my dad used to say, the cream will rise to the top, and you can chop off the rest that ain't the cream and then just keep hiring guys that fit that cream of the crop, and pretty soon you've got all cream. And then you have no excuses. Then it's all on the crew chief and the driver. And that's really what you want. You want to create a team to where the crew can't make the car run any better. The crew can't make the driver drive any better, but they can make mistakes that can cost you a race. So realistically, you want a crew that puts all the pressure on the driver and the crew chief to make all the good decisions because they're doing it perfect every time. And that helps you raise your level too of concentration and effort.
I have about 6 follow-up questions to that.
Awesome.
I've hung out with Cruz Pedregon at a few races here in Sears Point. And in talking to him, he was telling us about the drivers of today. And he's saying that the drivers today are basically hired shoes. They're not the wrenches anymore. They're not turning wrenches. They're not working on the car. They're not side by side with the crew trying to make it down the track with everybody. They're just, it's ready, get in, go set a number, cut a light, and drive down the track. Do you see that now as a harder thing to manage as a crew chief, the personality, or are they still an intricate part of that crew? Is there a separation now? How is that interaction between the crew and drivers nowadays?
I don't know every driver. I do know that I know what he's trying to get to with his point of, because he considers himself old school and he owns his own team and he helps tune it and do all this stuff. I still think there's some drivers out there like that, but yeah, there are some drivers who are just hired shoes. And I'll say like Sean Langdon that I have this year or had this year, but he's not a prima donna. He'll do whatever you want him to do. He wants to be the best. And I think you get into the hired gun thing as teams get more money and sponsors want more results. You start doing it the right way. You start hiring people for their abilities instead of hiring people because they can bring money to a team. That's one thing that's tough about drag racing is there's several teams that have drivers because they brought money to the team. And somebody always has to bring something, whether it's skill, money, working on the car, whatever. I mean, I don't like to compare people like that. I mean, I don't have a problem with Cruz saying that, but that's just not the way I'm not that way. I think everybody brings something. And again, just because so-and-so didn't get along with this driver or these group of guys didn't get along with that driver, maybe they have a point. Maybe he's a prima donna, but maybe they don't have a point. Maybe he just didn't fit chemistry-wise with those guys. And maybe on another group of guys, another team or another group of people in a different situation, let's say, he might do better. It might be easier to work with. I've never really had a hard time working for any driver. To me, they're just like crew guys and just like people in life. Everybody's different, and
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
Reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner,
or at JohnLG69.
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
it depends how accepting you are. If you're a person who expects the world to be 100% perfect, well, you're going to be an unhappy motherfucking person your whole life because nothing's perfect.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be nitpicky and you can't be anal about doing a good job, but you really need to live by the 80% rule. If people will do it 80% of the way you want it done, but it still comes out right, you need to be happy with that. Otherwise, again, you're going to be a miserable person all the time, and you're going to be distracted from the bigger picture, which is the other jobs you have to do. Crew chiefs are got to multitask all the time. So I try to accept people for who they are and try to use the motto of, we're all a product of our environment. So we get a new driver and things are different. And maybe we're not really it's not gelling right away. Well, doesn't mean it's not going to in 6 months, because maybe he'll become a little bit like us and maybe we'll become a little bit like him. And I think if there's a little give and take like that, you're opening yourself up to be successful and not having to have everything your way. I think we see that all the time now on the internet. Everybody complains about this or that when it ain't just perfectly their way. Everybody wants instant gratification, and it's got to be their way. Otherwise, nobody can even have like a decent debate anymore and actually be like, yeah, you make a good point there. All right, cool. I didn't think of it that way. No, it's you either like it the way I say it or fuck you. And I don't like that. I like to be able to have an open mind. And if somebody tells me something that I didn't think of, I'll be like first one to say, that's a good point you make there. All right, cool. And I think that's just, to be successful, you have to be a little bit like that. Is it too long-winded of an answer for you?
No, it's perfect.
I think it's a great answer. Look, as a crew chief, you're kind of the dad. You've got to help everybody get along, even if those motherfuckers got to, and you got to put a foot in their ass, or sometimes you got to rub backs. You can't let anybody get too close because someone else might get jealous that, that person's trying to kiss up to the, all these things. And you're like, I'm just trying to get down 1,000 feet as fast.
Yeah. I mean, there's part of it too, is like things you can't control, you need to not worry about. Otherwise you're wasting your time again. Like I can't worry about if somebody thinks a certain guy's kissing ass. That's between that. Sometimes you have to let people, like there's certain issues I let my crew deal with. You guys are adults. You're supposed to be professionals. I may talk with them all, have a meeting with them, and there's some squabbling going on. And if it's not out of control, I'll be like, why don't you guys just handle it yourself? You guys are professionals. Like, you guys got to learn how to get along. Like, I know you guys can do it. Go have a beer or something. Go have dinner. Figure it out. It can't be that bad, And for the most part, I haven't had to sit too many people down to help them rectify problems. It's happened, obviously I've been doing it for 25 years. So there's been instances where I hear a little bit of he said, she said stuff. So I'll just sit both guys down in the office together and make them hash it out in front of me and be a mediator. I think it goes a lot better that way sometimes than sitting with one guy and he feels comfortable to say whatever bullshit story he wants to say. And then you bring the other guy in and he says whatever bullshit story he wants to say. Then you didn't solve anything. Get them both together and let them debate right in front of you. I see a lot less bullshit that way.
Basically, take them out back and let them fight it out.
Sort of, this day and age, you can't really fist the cuffs too much anymore. You might get sued, but you can do it with verbal judo.
Yep.
As they taught in the police academy.
So I want to ask you about.
Hold on, before you ask me anything, I just got to say, I've been wanting to say this for a while. That frickin' butterfly kite you got back there is freaking the fuck out.
Yeah. It's pretty sweet. I'm in what we call the cat's room. This is the oldest boy is kind of moving out, and there's also Pink Floyd posters on the wall. But yes, there is a giant butterfly.
That's pretty funny. I'm in the cat's room / my office. I got all the pictures taken down as I'm getting ready to paint it.
Tommy.
But yeah, this is where the cats come.
See, just a little, idea of what we got over here. There's no butterfly bullshit on my walls, all right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything. I have a bunch of race pictures and all kinds of stuff. As soon as I get this thing painted up, maybe we'll have another interview and I'll show off some stuff. But hey, you got that Montana jersey there. I've actually got seat 16 out of the Candlestick Park.
Really? I just did a restoration on a friend of mine's seats that he had season tickets to for the numerous years. He bought them. They looked like shit. We stripped them all down, repowder coated them. They look brand new for him.
Yeah, I didn't have season tickets. I mean, we did back when they beat Dallas and Dwight Clark made the catch. I was there at that game.
Were you really?
Yes. I was on the 50-yard line about 19 rows up.
Hold that thought.
You were like 2 years old.
I was. I got to get Joe Montana to finish the play on it. The play's drawn on the other side.
That's cool.
He went too early, but
while Dave and Tommy masturbate on video on an audio podcast, let me now ask you the question.
Yeah, you're gonna talk tough shit with that butterfly in there. I just don't know.
Well, I'm gonna ask you a straightforward question then, and I want to ask because it's the question that a lot of the audience wants to know. So when you get fired from a team and you're trying to figure out why or what's next, talk a little bit about your experience because you are between jobs right now. You clearly know what you're doing, but that doesn't. I mean, great managers get fired all the time from baseball, football, everything. It's not necessarily indicative of performance. It's maybe a bad fit. So, what have you learned from the experience? What are your thoughts on how crew chiefs stay employed, get reemployed, whatever?
I guess I'm learning right now. I mean, I went for 25 years. I got fired one time, but I had a job like instantly. This is the first time that I've, gone, whatever it's been, 5 or 6 weeks without a job, so to speak. But, it is a business. I didn't get mad. I had a discussion with Connie Coletta. He had said that he was getting a little pressure from the sponsor and that he needed to make a change. And I said, okay. And I didn't know it was actually changing me out, but that's what he said. And I understand the business. It's business. Like you said, being a crew chief is like kind of a position of being a head coach in football, and you're on the chopping block all the time. It's very performance related, and they didn't think they were getting the performance that they wanted, so they needed to make a change. And sometimes I've seen plenty of owners have to do that. Doesn't mean they don't like you. It doesn't mean it's personal. It's just that to keep that multi-million dollars coming in from sponsors, they got to make sponsors happy. And sometimes it means maybe moving some people around. There's sometimes they might move one guy from one car to another one. You see it in NASCAR racing all the time where they'll take a crew chief and move them over to this car, or take this pit crew, move them over to this car, and just swap them around. And they made a choice not to do that. And so I'm looking for work. But I emptied out my office. Took me about 2 hours. I didn't realize how much crap I had in there. I'm kind of a pack rat. And when I got done, Connie was back from lunch. I went out there and I thanked him for the 6 years of opportunity that he gave me. And it seemed like it relaxed him a little bit. He smiled and shook my hand and thanked me for the 6 years of service that I gave him. So we ended on a good note. Nothing personal. Just it was a lay of the land at that time.
Where do you think you'll land? Still Top Fuel or a funny car?
Who knows, man? I'll do either. I don't care. I mean, dragsters are on my bucket list to do someday. Right now, it's about paying the bills, and whatever opportunity I get is making the best of it. I'm going to help. I know I'm going to be helping a dragster out that Greg Carrillo owns, and he raced Phoenix earlier this year, and they have a crew chief already, but they want to bring in another one for Denver to help the one they have. That's going to be, and so I'm going to help this other gentleman out for Denver. And then last week I was down in Charlotte trying to piece some things back together for Bob Gilbertson, who's I raced with him in 2005, 6, 6, and 7. He doesn't have much down there. He's trying to build his business back up again, but he wants to probably race Charlotte this year. So right now I have 2 teams that are a race each, and it ain't enough to make a living, but it's enough to at least I can pay a couple bills here and a couple bills there, and little by little just start to piece stuff together until the big fish comes along.
You've done pretty much crew chief only on Top Fuel, correct?
Only on funny cars.
Sorry, funny cars. The major difference between the two is if you were to, I know drivers go back and forth periodically between the 2 cars. As a crew chief going back and forth, how does that affect the way you tune the car itself? Because I've read that, I've seen that they drive differently, but essentially they're the same power plant, right?
Essentially, you run the dragster with a little bit more power, a little more tuned up than a funny car. You run the clutch a lot faster, the bearing in the clutch. It has more traction. The chassis works a lot different and better, basically, and the car is lighter, so you should be able to accelerate it quicker because the tires are the same size. So basically, from what I've heard, you could be a little more aggressive in your clutch application and your tune-up and get away with more on a dragster, and on a funny car, you really gotta gingerly with it and be a lot more smooth in your clutch application and be a little more conservative with a funny car.
When you're talking about the different styles of cars, I mean, I'm a complete novice with this. You've got funny car, modified, top fuel. Is there a division that's just unlimited where like you can bring a jet engine and an electric car and have them throw down? Or
no, nope. I mean, the nitro classes were pretty much what was unlimited years ago, but over time they've gotten so fast that they've had to limit them. I mean, now they've taken away half the track prep they used to do here towards the end of last year and the first couple races this year, and they're slowing the cars down with taking glue off the track basically and putting less glue on the track, so there's less traction compound. Traction compound, and we are in the summertime, which slows them down some anyway. But they don't want the cars to go 340 miles an hour, so they're coming up with ways to slow them down.
Is that because of the existing facilities just can't handle it? And you have to do that kind of racing at, I don't know, Bonneville or somewhere, or what?
Basically, from what I hear, Goodyear doesn't want the tires to go 340.
Really?
Yep.
That makes sense. I mean, those guys know what their tires are going to do. And we're asking.
I mean, and when you think about it, 340 miles an hour in 1,000 feet, I work on them and tune them, and I still think it's insane. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we got some dragsters are going almost 300 miles an hour in the 8th mile and 660 feet. That's really when the track prep was, really, really good here earlier in the first 3 races of the year. And then the end of last year, there were dragsters going 297 miles an hour and 660 feet. There are funny cars going 290 miles an hour and 660 feet and 339 miles an hour to 1,000 feet. It's getting a little insane.
It's been insane for a while.
If we race quarter mile now, it'd be really out of control.
And
how fast would cars be going at a quarter mile?
They'd at least go 350 if they still have parts in the motor. And they have what they call, MSD has what they call a rev limiter. It's not a true rev limiter where it stops at a certain RPM. What it does is starts taking timing out of it to try to take power out of it after it gets over a certain RPM. And they already have that thing, especially for the dragsters, pulled in so early and so much. There's not really much more you can do except for you're going to start taking blower away from them, where they have a limit on what type of blower you can run or obviously other things. So what they did here, I think they started 6 races ago or 7 races ago, where they changed the track prep and it's really slowed the cars down.
What about doing something else, like bringing another element into the game instead of, obviously control restricting air and retarding electricity or whatever it is. But I always like to, think any race that's measured in 1,000ths of a second is essentially a tie. And why not, you have to deliver 5 dozen eggs uncracked. It was part of the thing, or some other element. And I'm making a bit of a joke, but maybe there is some secondary skill you have to accomplish with that forces the driver, the team, to go a little slower while accomplishing the other
Sounds
task.
like you've been watching too many Japanese game shows.
Tommy, let me handle this. Let me have it. It's called road racing.
Yeah, well, having to turn is a whole bunch. Yeah, what about a decathlon of racing where we had the IROC thing for a while, but having someone sit in a drag car is a different thing than any other racing discipline, significantly different. I mean, there's no room for error, and yet there are errors. So is there room for some kind of a decathlon in
I
racing?
don't think so. I mean, if you had a TV show built around it, then yeah, but I mean, at the races, nah. I mean, the show is actually pretty good as it is right now. Obviously at the races, if you wanted to do something screwy like that, it would have to be some sort of reality show to make it fly. Maybe they can. Who knows what sells nowadays? I don't know what is entertaining to people. You know what I mean? Half the reason what makes it hard to slow these cars down is they really still haven't recovered from the big recession, and NHRA does not have enough technical people, and their tech department is basically on a shoestring budget, and they need to have a bigger tech department. Then we could actually have more rules for these cars that they could actually have manpower to actually oversee. Right now, they don't have enough people to really oversee putting any more rules on them. So the best way to do it, at least right now, was track prep.
That's an interesting topic there. But I didn't know they did that. It makes more sense because I follow it periodically, and I've been noticing a lot of cars smoking the tires half track, and that makes sense now. I don't think I've ever heard anyone mention it before.
Yeah, it's taken everybody a while to adapt to it, but once everybody adapts to it, it's a little harder on your ego because you don't get to run those big ETs. And the way NHRA handled it, I think if they would have done it from day one at the beginning of the year, it would have been a lot better than throwing it on people after they've already spent money testing before preseason testing and figuring out what combination they're going to run for the season or for most of the season. So there's been some parts attrition from smoking the tires and not being ready for it. And I don't think the NHRA handled. I think their heart was in the right place by what they're doing, and I think it will definitely work. I don't think that their application of it was probably done totally right. But who are we to judge? Maybe it was something that a certain amount of them wanted to do, but somebody else higher up than them voted it out, and then all of a sudden cars started going fast again, and somebody said, hey, we better go with that guy's idea. We should have done it at the beginning of the year, but we didn't. So at least they're doing something. I got to give them credit for at least making a move and trying to do something.
And you think them doing something, though, is in relation to safety, or do you think it is?
I think it's related to what Goodyear didn't want to see, related to what NHRA's lawyers wanted. I mean, once Goodyear says we don't want to be liable for anything that happens with these tires, if cars are going to be going 340 miles an hour, well, that pretty much puts the ball in NHRA's court. Well, they don't want to deal with being liable either. So it's all just a snowball effect. And I don't know how much of safety it is, but it's definitely trying to stay within the box that they were given by Goodyear.
One thing I've always said about any racing industry is they make rules, whether it's for safety or to slow cars down or what have you. But as a racer, and I'm sure you've been in this driver's seat for this as well, they make a rule and you figure out how to use that rule or to get around it to go faster with each new rule set that comes out, just like with the quarter mile down to the 1,000-foot mark, right? There's a lot of people that were tuning only to the 1,000-foot mark, so it didn't slow them down at all. If they start doing this track prep, less and less, you guys are going to get into clutch management and power management more, but you guys are going to end up back in the same result.
I think we will. That's our jobs. It's their job to slow us down. It's our job to be quicker and faster than the guy we're racing. Well, competition, or as Harbaugh would say, iron sharpens iron. So if we're all competing with each other on a level playing field, it's our job to figure out how to make our package better than the next guy's. And in turn, as that happens, you learn more things. You build different parts. You build better stuff. It's not going to happen by next year. If they keep the track, if they stay firm and keep the track prep the way it is, we won't be running as quick as we were into last year. We won't be running that fast for a few years. It'll take a while to catch back up because it's going to take some tweaks with the chassis. It's going to take some tweaks with the clutch, some tweaks with horsepower, and it's getting harder and harder to find places to tweak it because there are a lot of rules already that keep us from touching too many things.
Is it fair to say that your guys' ability to make power and put it on the road and go fast exceeds Goodyear's ability to build a tire to handle that? I mean, are they also in the same thing? Like, are you guys pushing them to create a 500-mile-an-hour tire?
No, we don't. No, we're not. And obviously, I don't think there's any drivers that want to go 500 mile an hour in 1,000 feet. It got to be hard. It'd have to be hard on the body because you got to remember, these cars are already, when the track's really good, let's say a funny car, let's say, runs a low 380 at, like, say, 335 miles an hour. At about 1.5 seconds, they're pulling almost 6 Gs. Now, when they hit the finish line and have to pull the chutes, they pull a negative 6 Gs. So the faster you go, the more negative Gs you're going to pull too. And at a certain point in time, your eyes aren't going to be able to be liking that, amongst other things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, TBI you guys have to be getting, some kind of concussion type symptoms. I mean, I know, like, just from being in the Army, being around a Barrett, and Dave, you and I have shot a half-powered Barrett out in Vegas, right? And the concussion wave from that thing, you're talking about comparable forces when you've got over a 10,000 horsepower engine blowing up around you, and sometimes actually blowing up around you. Where is drag racing headed? What's What's 10 years down the road if you were to guess?
And I don't really know. I tell you, I've been a little worried, but I mean, I've known I've been asked this question 15 years ago, again 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and I'm a little worried. But I think if enough of us worry, we can, and enough of us care about the sport, we can get it through. And fuel racing, as I'm calling part of the sport, drag racing will always be around. Drag racing is not going anywhere. Drag racing's as a whole is probably healthier than it's been in years, with all these radial races and small tire races and grudge races and all this stuff. Drag racing as a whole, I think, is very, very healthy. Fuel racing getting a little bit better, but it's also, to me, it's on the fence right now. It's teetering. It could be really bad the next 5 years if it's not taken care of the proper way, as far as from NHRA side and marketing and how much budget you have to have. Or it could actually grow and get back to, kind of one of the latest heydays that I dealt with was like back in 2005. We used to have, 26 funny cars show up for 16 spots. So there was 10 pissed off sponsors and teams every race. And now we're lucky to get 17 to 18 funny cars at a race, and they're lucky to get 16 dragsters to a race. So it's got room to grow again, and we'll see if the economy can somehow hold its head up for another few years. Maybe we'll be okay and come through this and be able to. I'd like to be able to retire from doing this, but I've already started to have other game plans. Like maybe I need to learn how to run a pro mod. Maybe I think I'm going to go take the Holly fuel injection school here, next month or two, just so I have that under my belt, because I've never really dealt with electronic fuel injection. I just deal with mechanical fuel injection, and I can see where a lot of the sport is going the way of electronic fuel injection. I need to make sure that I have those abilities in case I'm always going to want to race. If I had enough money, I would do this shit for free. I mean, that's how much of a racer I am. I don't just do this for a job. I happen to do it for a job, but even on my weekends, I go race my own race car. No matter what, I'm still going to be racing. I just have to figure out what I'm going to be working on and make sure that I have. It's almost like being 50 and going back to college to make sure you got some backup plan. Basically what I'm kind of doing right now. And I got the time to do it right now. I don't have a job.
You mentioned the no prep, and you got all these reality shows and these no prep events that are now getting to be bigger and bigger because it's real racing, as they call it, no glue. But I was thinking about this earlier this week.
But there's glue.
There is. Yeah, there's remnants, or it's not actual prepped, and sometimes they scrape the track or what have you.
There's glue. They're not racing on cement.
Yes, I agree.
These no prep races, and that's why if you talk to these no prep guys, they don't like to be first pair. They like to be later on in the deal because the rubber starts coming alive.
Absolutely.
And the other flip side is they wreck a lot of them. I think I guess it's cool in one way if that's your cup of tea. But I think it's a flash in the pan thing to where I think it's a fad. I think it's going to go away. These guys can't just keep throwing money away wrecking cars all the time. They're wrecking them like candy, like six packs. And that's going to get old. You're going to lose people that are going to want to do it after a while. I mean, it'll take a while unless they get it under control. But I don't see how it can sustain itself at the rate that they're wrecking cars.
Well, especially once the TV money goes away.
Well, that too.
It's
right.
Once it's one thing to be making $1 million a year and wrecking cars and it's driving ratings, but when that has become old hat, you've got to find another way to do it. I mean, look, the Tuttles don't have a bunch of money anymore, because everybody stopped freaking out about choppers.
Well, yeah, it was a fad, and fads come and go. They can come back in. I mean, Tuttle's got a show again all of a sudden, but and I could be totally wrong. That's just my opinion, and we all got one, right? Just like an asshole, everybody's got one. But my opinion is that the no prep deal is kind of a fad.
Well, where I was going with it, though, if you think about it, you and your Nova back in the mid '90s when you were running that, and you went from bracket racing into heads up racing. I mean, that essentially was kind of your start of no prep racing. Now it's just been glamorized.
What are you talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is when I was running events at Sears or Sac Raceway, they weren't out there spraying down the track and dragging it for us.
They actually did.
Well, when I was there, we did. And we'd always like to show up after the big events when the rubber and the stuff was remaining. But
Dan DeVita takes care of that track like nobody else, and he'll do it when you guys aren't watching. Like before you guys get to the track, Dan DeVita would spend a lot of hours actually prepping that track because they were pretty proud of having a decent race. So now they wouldn't do all the prep like the fuel guys have.
Yeah.
It's not going to be ultimate prep like that. But I know Dan DeVita personally, and I know how much pride he takes in that track out there. And he would spend a lot of times before you guys would get there, or a bracket race or whatever would get there. And he knows he doesn't have to prep it at 1,000 feet because we don't make enough power.
Yeah.
But they would prep the first 60 to 150 feet and make sure the thing was kind of groomed. And if it needed to be scrape. If it needed a little bit of glue, put a little glue on it. Like maybe some tracks, I've been to Muncie, Indiana. I've been there. It was like, yeah, that was pretty bad. That was probably worse than a no prep track. But you have your big tracks like, Norwalk, Sears Point, Vegas, Pomona. Well, they don't even race that much in Pomona, but a lot of these other tracks that they do their prep. Like even when I raced at Milan, Michigan is like 6 miles from my house. That's kind of what I built. That's kind of what I invented the Nova for. They do prep out there before you get there. It just doesn't get as much prep as like you see on a fuel deal. You're not getting 200 gallons of traction compound through the weekend on it. You're getting, 5 gallons, but you're still getting prep.
Did you ever run Baylands?
I did not run Baylands. I'd been there. I didn't have a race car yet. Ken Adams, I went there with him. Me and Frank Cervelli went there. Took Frank's convertible Camaro, put it in the car show, and then Ken Adams raced his red 57 Bel Air that he used to have and drive around town. I don't know if you remember that car.
That car was awesome.
Yeah. He raced it. I think runner up there. That was the last race at Baylands ever. We were at that race. Then they closed it down.
There were some other folks that had fast cars at Benicia. Chris Mead had that car that his dad had kind of detuned for him. Do you remember that Camaro?
Yeah, I own it. I own
What's
it.
That? Oh, do you know shit?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
He kicked a rod in it before he went to college. So we made a trade. I had one of my El Caminos and traded one of my El Caminos and took that thing all blowed up and was going to be a project of mine, but it's actually sitting in North Carolina right now on a rotisserie.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
But it's been sitting there for, I don't know, 8 years. Now I don't have a job, so now that thing's dropped back down on the priority list way low. I'm just hoping. I just went down there to pay some storage on it. I told my buddy, well, the way this project's been going, I said, I've owned that thing since I think 92 or 91. I go, I just hope I can get it done before I die. That's my goal now is to get it back put together. And that car is actually an original silver and black car.
Oh, yes. Is it really? Oh, that's so. I remember when his dad was buying it for him, and he took out like an engine that was at least like 50 cubic inches bigger and way stronger. He's like, this is just too crazy. Do you remember?
Yeah,
this
they had the 350. They had like a little dirt track 350 in it for a while. And then they built a 302 for it.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah. Dan Mills had a fast Cougar as well.
Yep.
And that thing was
that had a 351 Cleveland in it.
That's crazy. It's fun to talk about Benicia stuff. It's fun to talk about drag.
There was also some people in Benicia thought they had a fast car, but they really didn't.
That must have been Pickles.
Pickles had a
GTI. Or anybody in the Carl family.
Oh. Yeah.
I don't know. It might have been. I know that I put a different set of heads. I put a ported set of heads on my El Camino, and for a while that was the fastest car in Benicia. Nice. And for a while it was probably a top 3 car in Concord.
Oh wow! So and you guys used to race out in the industrial park. Those days are long gone.
Oh yeah. I didn't do that much racing out there.
Oh no.
No, I did most of mine at Sears Point. I mean, not that we never. I think me and Rob Moore made a couple passes. Rob Moore's car was pretty fast when he got it together.
Yeah.
He had that. I think it was a 73 Mustang with a 351 Cleveland and a top loader 4-speed in it. He did beat me out there one day. I had a broken piston. I still tried to race him. He beat me. And I did a couple little street races over in Pleasant Hill, but I don't know if I don't know why. I just rather be on the racetrack. The street race thing was maybe a year or two when I was really young and dumb.
Yeah. And
then I just stopped, just kept it on the track and started building race cars. Like we built Frank Cervelli's first, even before I had a race car, we built a 66 Chevelle for him to race at Sears Point. And I want to say 89 or 90. My dad and Frank and I built it in the garage. That's kind of how I really caught the drag racing bug. I mean, I was doing some high school racing when I could drive out to Sears Point, but then we built his car and we would go to some Super Chevys and go to Bakersfield and stuff like that. And that's when I built the Nova.
In your progression in learning, how did you get into the Top Fuel? What broke you into that, and who was your mentor to kind of teach you the tuning windows and stuff of the actual fuel cars?
There's a lot of different guys that were mentors to me. Connie Coletta, Mike Green a little bit, some of it by osmosis. But my main mentor, a lot like my track dad, and Ed the Ace McCullough. When I left Tommy Johnson Jr.'s and I went to when I left there, I went and worked for Connie Coletta on his car. And Ed the Ace McCullough was crew chief over there. And within about 6 months, he took a liking to me and took me under his wing. And when he left Coletta's and went to Snakes, that's when I went to Snakes. And then I don't remember what year it was. He ended up leaving Snakes and went over to Schumacher's with Ron Capps on the Brute car. I went to North Carolina to work on a little bit of a lower independent guy, Bob Gilbertson. In 2008, when I left there, Ace was the first one on the phone and told me don't take a job from anybody and that Schumacher would be hiring me. So I got to work with Ace again, but on my own, but a crew chief in my own car and him crew chief in a car. And that was a fun 3 years before he retired, getting to still learn from him, but him also getting to see where I was at in my career from basically nobody and taking what he taught me and then trying to take what he taught me to the next level. And we still talk. He's always going to be the main guy in my drag racing history, but Ed the Ace is a badass. There's no doubt.
My experience with nitro is filling a GoPed with it 20% and watching it melt all into one piece.
Well, that's because you got to take some compression out of it, dude. You got to remember, nitro expands 10 times its volume. So you have to take compression out when you're going to put nitro in something.
You just blew Dave's mind.
Yeah. Hey, when you're 14 years old and you want to go faster, you just pour nitro and stuff from your, RC car.
Well, it'll work, but you got to drill the jets out and put a thicker head gasket on, or take the piston out and at least belt sand it to get it down.
I'm going to go back in time and try all that.
There you go, man. There you go.
All right, so back in time, we will all go and try to be better racers, and we'll all make better decisions, or not, whatever. Either way, Tommy, you're always welcome on the show. It was fun talking to you and, learning about drag racing. And I don't know how much you know about our show, but, we cover a wide swath, and we've never had anybody who's a national champion team chief from a drag racing community. So that's fantastic, man. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with us. I'm sure a gig for you is not far away. Just know that we all of us in Benicia love seeing your updates and everything else, because it's cool to know that people in Benicia know how to go fast, and we have champion in the hall and the records. So thank you for hanging with us, and thank you, Dave, for coming in and hanging out with me as well. That's awesome.
Thank you for having me. I learned a whole bunch and very enjoyable. I'm glad I got to have this conversation with you.
Well, nice to meet you, Dave.